Welcome to JT Scary Tales. She Murdered Her Daughter. 3 True Horror Stories Animated. Lake Bodom Murder. The Lake Bodom Massacre, a chilling unsolved mystery. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow over Lake Bodom, a secluded spot in Finland known for its still waters and dense forests. It was the summer of 1960, and 4 teenagers, Nils Gustafsson, Seppo Boisman, and their girlfriends, Mila Bjorklund and Anja Maki, set out on a camping trip that would end in one of the most infamous unsolved crimes in history. They pitched their tent near the lake, eager for a night of laughter, romance, and adventure. The group had no idea that their peaceful retreat would soon descend into horror. A night of terror, sometime between the dead of night and the early hours of June 5th. An unknown assailant descended upon the sleeping campers with a brutality that defied explanation. The attacker slashed through the fabric of the tent, wielding a knife and a blunt object with unrelenting force. Seppo, Mila, and Anja never stood a chance. Their bodies were found covered in deep stab wounds and severe blunt force trauma. The sheer savagery of the attack suggested a deeply personal rage, yet investigators struggled to find any link between the victims and a potential suspect. Oddly enough, Nils Gustafsson, the only survivor, was found outside the tent, unconscious and covered in blood. His injuries were severe, fractured facial bones and a concussion, but far less lethal than those of his friends. Was he simply lucky to be alive, or was there something more sinister at play? The investigation begins. When authorities arrived at the scene, they were met with a chilling sight. Blood soaked the earth, torn pieces of the tent fluttered in the breeze, and the campers' belongings lay scattered around as if a violent storm had ripped through the area. But there was something even more unsettling. Their personal items, including their wallets and a few pieces of clothing, were missing. Initially, the police believed the killings might have been a robbery gone wrong. However, there was no clear evidence of forced entry, and the sheer brutality of the attack seemed excessive for a simple theft. Suspicion began to shift towards Nils. Some theorized that he had suffered a psychological break, attacking his friends in a fit of rage before passing out due to his own injuries. But there was one problem: his wounds were inconsistent with self-inflicted harm. And there was no murder weapon found at the scene. As the case gained national attention, the public was desperate for answers. A few eyewitnesses came forward, claiming to have seen a tall, blonde man walking near the campsite on the night of the murders. Others spoke of a mysterious figure in dark clothing, watching the lake from a distance. But without solid evidence, these leads soon went cold. Theories and suspects. Over the years, several theories emerged. Some believed that a serial killer was responsible, one who had struck before and vanished without a trace. Others pointed to local drifters, a deranged soldier, or even a vagrant living in the woods. But perhaps the most controversial theory was the one that brought the case back into the spotlight decades later. In 2004, over 40 years after the murders, Finnish authorities arrested Nils Gustafsson, the lone survivor, and charged him with the killings. New forensic techniques had allegedly linked him to the crime, and prosecutors argued that a drunken altercation had led to the massacre. According to their version of events, Nils had become violent, attacking his friends in a fit of rage before passing out from his injuries. However, the defense dismantled the case piece by piece. There was no direct DNA evidence tying Nils to the murders, and eyewitness accounts from the night contradicted the idea that he had been the aggressor. After a highly publicized trial, he was acquitted due to a lack of concrete proof. Once again, the case returned to the realm of unsolved mysteries, a haunting legacy. Even today, the Lake Bodom murders remain one of Finland's most infamous cold cases, drawing comparisons to America's most haunting unsolved crimes. Like the Zodiac Killer and the Black Dahlia murder, the scene of the crime, once a place of teenage laughter and innocent adventure, is now steeped in folklore and urban legend. Some say that if you listen closely at night, you can still hear the whispers of the victims carried by the wind, their spirits forever trapped in the darkened woods. Decades have passed, but one chilling question remains. Who killed those 3 teenagers on that fateful night by Lake Bodom? Until the truth is uncovered, the shadows of that unspeakable horror will linger, a grim reminder that sometimes, The darkest nightmares are the ones we never wake up from. Chloe Driver story. It was supposed to be a fresh start. That's what I told myself as I drove into the remote countryside of Tennessee. I had taken a job as a live-in nanny for the Driver family, a husband and wife with a 2-year-old daughter named Ava. The ad had been simple, seeking compassionate caregiver for young child. Room and board provided. I needed the escape, the quiet, and above all, the money. From the moment I arrived at the Driver home, something felt off. Their house was old and isolated, perched on a hill surrounded by thick forest. It had once been a farmhouse, but any warmth it once had was long gone. The air inside felt thick, heavy with an unsettling quiet. Chloe Driver was the first to greet me. She was a tall woman with piercing blue eyes. Her long dark hair braided neatly down her back. Her presence was commanding, almost eerie. Her husband, Michael, was quieter, standing behind her with the uneasy posture of a man who had long since surrendered his will to someone else. And then there was Ava, tiny, blonde-haired, and wide-eyed. She clung to Chloe, her little fingers gripping her mother's dress so tightly I wondered if she was afraid to let go. "She's shy," Chloe said, brushing her daughter's hair from her face. "But she'll warm up to you." I should have left right then. At first, my job was simple: care for Ava, cook meals, keep the house tidy. But the more time I spent there, the more uneasy I became. Chloe spoke in riddles, often muttering strange phrases about cleansing and preparation. She and Michael would disappear for hours into the basement, always locking the door behind them. At night, I'd hear hushed voices chanting from below, the low hum of their words making my skin crawl. I wasn't allowed in the basement. One afternoon, while Chloe was out, I tried the door, locked, but through the small gap at the bottom, I could see something flickering, candlelight, and I could smell something awful, something metallic and rotting. I confronted Michael about it that evening. His face went pale, and he looked toward the stairs, as if afraid she would hear. "You don't understand," he whispered. "She's preparing for something bigger than you or me." That night, I barely slept. Then came the storm. It was past midnight when I woke to Ava's screaming. I ran down the hall, but her room was empty, her bedsheets thrown to the floor. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing through the windows. I heard voices downstairs. I followed the sound to the basement door, which now stood open. The candlelight flickered against the walls, casting long, twisting shadows. And then I saw them, Chloe and Michael, standing in a circle of symbols drawn in what looked like blood. Ava was in the center, her tiny body trembling as Chloe raised a knife above her head. My body moved before I could think. I lunged, grabbing Chloe's arm and throwing her off balance. The knife clattered to the floor. Michael just stood there, frozen, his face twisted in a mixture of fear and awe. "Help me," Ava screamed, reaching for me. I grabbed her, running up the basement stairs as Chloe's screams turned to something inhuman, a guttural, otherworldly sound that made my stomach churn. The storm howled as I threw open the front door and ran into the rain. Ava clinging to me. I didn't stop, not even when I heard Chloe shriek my name behind me. By the time I reached the nearest town, my clothes were soaked, my legs aching. I ran straight into the police station, breathless, Ava sobbing in my arms. They didn't believe me at first, but when the officers arrived at the house, they found the basement exactly as I had described: symbols, candles, bloodstains. But Chloe and Michael were gone. They never found them. And Ava? She's safe now. She doesn't remember much, just flashes, candles, chanting. Her mother's face twisted in something unrecognizable. As for me, I still hear Chloe's voice in my dreams, whispering from the dark. It wasn't supposed to end this way. Jeffrey Epstein. It started like a dream, one of those rare opportunities that seem too good to be true. And as I would later learn, that's exactly what it was. I was 19, fresh out of high school, and living in Florida. Like so many girls my age, I had big dreams. Modeling was my passion, and when a friend introduced me to a woman who claimed to have connections in the industry, I was ecstatic. She was charming, well-dressed, and spoke with the confidence of someone who knew important people. When she offered to introduce me to a billionaire financier who could help launch my career, I didn't hesitate. His name was Jeffrey Epstein. When I met him for the first time at his Palm Beach mansion, everything about him screamed wealth and power. He was polite, almost fatherly, and told me he had helped countless young women find success. Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman who had introduced us, was always by his side, her British accent making everything sound so refined. She assured me that Epstein had the means to make my career take off. All I had to do was trust him. Trust, such a simple word, and yet it's what ruined so many lives. At first, it seemed harmless. I was invited to one of his private properties in New York, where I was promised an exclusive event filled with industry insiders. It was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. I arrived at a luxurious townhouse, and everything about it felt surreal. The expensive artwork, the grand staircase, the way people whispered about Epstein like he was royalty. Then, things took a turn. That night, I was taken to a private room. Epstein was there, waiting. He told me to relax, that everything was part of the experience. The next moments are a blur: coercion, pressure, the feeling of complete helplessness. I wasn't alone. There were other girls, some younger than me, their faces blank, their eyes void of emotion. I wanted to run, but where? Who could I turn to? I had no money, no connections, and everyone in Epstein's circle seemed to worship him. Even the staff avoided eye contact, as if acknowledging my distress would make them complicit. For the next few weeks, I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Epstein and Maxwell controlled everything: the flights, the schedules, even what I wore. I was taken to his private island, Little St. James, a place that should have been paradise but instead felt like a prison. The island was remote, and the only way out was through Epstein himself. I saw powerful men coming and going, men whose names I recognized from TV and magazines. And the worst part? They all knew. They all looked at us like we were disposable, as if we were nothing more than playthings to be used and discarded. I was one of the lucky ones. One night, I found an opportunity to escape. Epstein had fallen into a routine of trust, believing I wouldn't dare run. But I did. I managed to slip away and find help. It took years before the world truly saw Epstein for what he was: a predator hiding behind money and influence. When he was finally arrested in 2019, it felt like a victory, but a hollow one. He took the easy way out, dying in his cell before he could face justice. But for those of us who survived, the scars remain, the nightmares don't fade, and the powerful people who once circled around him, many of them still walk free, their secrets buried deep. I tell my story not for sympathy, but for truth, because the world needs to know what Jeffrey Epstein was, and more importantly, that there are still others out there just like him. Do you love spine-chilling stories and eerie mysteries? You've come to the right place. At JT Scary Tales, we bring you the most terrifying and thrilling scary tales from around the world. From haunted places to unexplained phenomena, our scary tales will keep you on the edge of your seat. Subscribe now and dive into the dark world of scary tales.